Jews are God's chosen people, that the Jewish homeland is Israel, that the Jews believe in the Old Testament, and that the Old Testament is about Jews. However, almost none of these facts are true. Nowhere in the Bible does it call the Jews God's chosen people. Modern-day Israel isn't really the homeland of the Jews. The Jews don't really believe in the Old Testament, and only maybe 5% of the people in the Old Testament can even be considered Jewish. So now that you've branded me an anti-Semite, we can begin. So, the expression anti-Semite literally means against Shem, or his descendants. However, being anti-Jewish isn't the same as being anti-Semitic. So, let me explain. The Semites are the descendants of a man named Shem, who would father some of the world's most renowned empires and dynasties, such as the Assyrian and Babylonian empires, and even the Persians can call themselves Semites. So, why is it when you say something against the Jews, you are considered anti-Semitic? Because just like stealing your religion, your homes, your money and businesses, some Jews also love stealing names, inheritance, and land. So Shem is the son of Noah, the guy who built the ark when Mesopotamia flooded. The Sumerian kingdom would be destroyed by the flood, and the Semites would descend from the Caucasian mountains and establish the Akkadian Empire. Shem would have children, and one of his descendants would be named Eber. He would be the father of the Hebrew people, and the Semites would be called by his name. Eber's line would eventually give birth to a man named Abram, or a Jew named Abraham, except Abraham has never been a Jew, nor will he ever be a Jew, and to call Abraham one is just plain ignorant, so let's go through it. So, according to the Bible, Abraham was a Hebrew and not a Jew, who God promised would be the father of many nations, not one single Jewish nation, but many nations, and that through him all the families of the world would be blessed. Abraham would pass this blessing on to his younger son Isaac, and not his eldest son Ishmael. Isaac would have twin sons named Esau and Jacob. Again, the Abrahamic blessing would be passed down to the younger brother Jacob, who would then be renamed to Israel. Israel would then have 12 sons. His sons would each become their own tribes, and eventually become their own nations. One of his sons would be named Judah, who would be the father of the Jewish people, and all Jews are related to him. Even though all Jews are Israelites, majority of Israelites are not Jews. Obviously, Israel would have to pass the Abrahamic blessing to Judah in order for them to be the chosen people. Israel would want his favorite son Joseph to inherit the Abrahamic blessing. However, Judah, the father of the Jews, would be jealous and conspire with his brothers to have Joseph killed. In the end, Judah sold Joseph into slavery for silver, much like Judah sold Jesus to the Jews. So the Bible portrays Judah as a jealous villain and Joseph as the chosen son. While in slavery, Joseph would rise to become the prime minister of Egypt and father two sons named Ephraim and Manasseh. In the end, Israel would adopt Joseph's sons and pass the Abrahamic blessing on to them, making them the chosen people and dividing Joseph into 2 tribes, making 13 tribes of Israel. As for the father of the Jews, his 2 eldest sons would die and Judah would end up bowing down to Joseph. So, now that you understand that the Jews were never intended to bless the world, nor were they ever considered the chosen people, we can move on to our second point. So, is the Jewish homeland Israel? And the answer is yes and not at all. Israel was originally called the land of Canaan, named after Noah's grandson, Canaan. The land of Canaan was conquered by the Israelites after they left Egypt with Moses, found in the book of Exodus. The Bible says God commanded the Israelites to punish the Canaanites for their sexual immorality, which led to child sacrifice, which would eventually lead to cannibalism. The word cannibal actually comes from the words Canaan and the god Baal. Baal was the god of Canaan, and the priests were known for eating the children after they were sacrificed to him, hence why we call them cannibals. So now that you understand what kind of people were living in Canaan, try not to feel so bad when you read that God ordered us to exterminate them. The borders of the Jewish homeland were established by Joshua, who was one of the descendants of Joseph and not from Judah. So if we were to restore the Jews to their original land, according to the Bible, the Jewish homeland would look less like this and more like that. So, like the story of Joseph and Judah, their children likewise wouldn't get along either. After becoming nations, there would be a civil war. The Jews would rule the southern kingdom of Judea, while Joseph's sons would rule the northern kingdom, keeping the name Israel. They would have different religions, believe in different gods, and while Judah stayed in Judea, Joseph would ally himself with the Phoenicians and establish colonies and trade posts all over the Mediterranean. The kingdom of Israel would be corrupted by foreign ideologies, and like the Canaanites would fall into materialism, sexual immorality, and child sacrifice, which would lead to them being conquered by the Assyrian Empire. Some of the Israelites would be taken into captivity into the lands of Assyria and Media, while some of the Israelites and Phoenicians would flee to their colonies and trade posts, fulfilling the promise made to Abraham that the world would be blessed through him, as he would be the father of many nations. So the sons of Joseph would become fruitful and multiply among the nations, forgetting who they are, which shouldn't surprise us considering their names literally mean fruitful and forgetful. Just like the northern kingdom, the Jews would fall into sexual immorality and start sacrificing their children. They would be conquered and enslaved by the Babylonians, then freed and re-established by the Persians, conquered again by the Greeks, and later occupied by the Romans. While under Roman rule, the Jews would launch the greatest revolution in Roman history, known as the Great Revolt, which would fail, causing Judea, Jerusalem, and the Jewish temple to be destroyed, ironically fulfilling everything Jesus and the Christians said would happen. The Jews, not being satisfied with losing their temple and homeland, would stab the Romans in the back by launching 2 more rebellions, killing over 500,000 Greeks and Romans. God would bless the chosen people with 2 more humiliating defeats, along with a banishment from the land, causing Judea to be renamed to Syria Palestina. So the reason the Jews have been able to take Palestine really rests on the fact that they've stolen the name Israel and have convinced the Christian West that they are the chosen people and that they alone are Israel. But once putting things into perspective, we see that just isn't true. Which brings us to our third point. Do the Jews believe in the Old Testament? The answer is kind of and not really. While waving around the Old Testament as if they believe in it, the Jews actually have secondary books that they consider just as important, the main book being called the Talmud. To explain the Talmud, we have to understand some basic Jewish Roman history, going back to Emperor Claudius, who, like Emperor Tiberius, tried to ban the Jews from Rome after branding them aggressive troublemakers. Sadly, Emperor Claudius didn't understand how to play the Game of Thrones and ended up mysteriously being killed. His successor, Emperor Nero, would lift the Jewish ban, which shouldn't surprise us considering the Talmud says he was a Jewish convert. Nero and his Jews would engage in some of the most barbaric acts known to man. Just to give you an idea of how crazy this pro-Jewish Roman emperor was, Nero burned down Rome and blamed it on the Christians, causing them to be tortured and killed in the worst ways imaginable. He murdered his entire family, then kicked his pregnant wife and unborn child to death, and then castrated a young boy named Sporus and forced him to dress like the wife who he had just murdered. With the coming of Jesus, the Jews would divide into 2 main groups. Those who believed that Jesus is the Messiah, while the other group of Jews rejected this claim, believing that their Messiah would come wielding a sword to destroy the Romans and set up a Jewish empire, which is what led the Jews to revolt against Rome in the first place. That, and they just didn't want to pay taxes. After their failed rebellions, the Jews would retreat to Babylon, creating the religion we know today as Judaism, making Christianity older by about 200 years. The Jews would argue and say that the Talmud is the oral law that was passed down orally without any mistakes since the time of Moses, before finally being written down between 200 and 400 years after Jesus. This would place the Jews in first place above the Muslims for the longest, most successful game of broken telephone ever played. The Talmud speaks of its love for Christians by calling the mother of Jesus a whore and calling Jesus a bastard sorcerer who is in hell boiling in human shit. Which brings us to our last point. Is the Old Testament about Jews? The answer is no, not really. Because the Jews have stolen the name Israel, you would never guess that the majority of the people in the Bible are not Jewish. The Apostle Paul, for instance, even though everyone calls him a Jew, Paul quickly separates himself from the Jews and says, "I am an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin." The Bible also says that God sent Paul to preach among the Israelites. And funny enough, Paul's ministry wasn't in Judea, but he was sent to preach to the Galatians in Asia Minor, the Greeks in Greece, and the Romans in Rome. The Bible is constantly separating the kingdom of Israel from the kingdom of Judah, as it is constantly separating Joseph from Judah. The entire Jewish deception and hijacking of the Bible depends on them stealing the terms Semites, Hebrews, and Israelites. For example, Moses, the man who wrote the first 5 books, known as the Torah, did not come from the tribe of Judah, nor was he part of the kingdom of Judea, yet somehow he is a Jew. The reality here is the majority of the people in the Old Testament are not Jewish. The Bible is a book that tells the history of many nations and peoples, like the Semites, Hebrews, Israelites, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Armenians, Persian, Greeks, Romans, and many others. It's not only about Jews.